And I'm a 27-year wildlife biologist and stream restoration and ecology person. I am the restoration, the stewardship manager with the Clackamas River Basin Council. And who here lives in the Clackamas River Basin? A few of us, fabulous. So the River Basin Council, most people say, well, what the heck is that? Well, we're a nonprofit and we're the advocate for you, people that live on the river. So we advocate for clean water, especially clean drinking water for the 400,000 people that drink out of the Clackamas River. You may not know that. For salmon habitat and for our riparian areas. So we do a whole lot of different kinds of work in the Clackamas River Basin. I'm very proud both to work here and to live here. I have a farm up in Sandy off of Tickle Creek. So I really appreciate everybody coming to this class today. It is so much fun to teach this class. I've been teaching wildlife classes, birds, mammals, the whole nine, gardening for wildlife for a long time, because one thing that I found is that we are, as we go through life, we are really getting separate from the ecosystem that we rely on and live in. And we start to look at things as us against them, us against wildlife. And it's a little dismaying because if we don't have all of this out here, we don't have us. So it's maybe a little bit self-serving to say that I'm all about being pretty hardcore, not conservationist, but pretty hardcore about everybody's preservation. When we do that, we just need to understand each other a little bit better. So we've already had a discussion if people haven't actually come in here before when we were having this talk about my nickname, which is Roadkill. So in college, I had a mammals class. We had to prepare skins and skulls, much like this. I was also a poor older college student who ate a lot of ramen and cabbage because I was paying my way through there and realized that in New England there was a plethora of food products left on the side of the road during the winter, carefully packed on ice for several months out of the year. So at 2 years into college, I realized I can eat a whole lot better than I was. So that being said, we'll move on. All right, yeah, absolutely. So if it gets too hot in here, we can crack some more windows too. So just let me know. So why do we need a Living with Wildlife class anyway? So I'm going to get basically, let's talk about the past 500 years of our existence. In the past 500 years, we've had a lot of improvements in things like our ability to eat food and produce food, improved sanitation. If anybody's read about the cholera epidemics, we've improved that substantially. We've been able to grow our population exponentially in the last 500 years. So natural processes that used to keep us down aren't. Wildlands used to be the exclusive domain of wild animals, and now we're moving into those wildlands, right? So we talk a lot about encroachment. People call me about this animal's encroaching on me, and really it's the opposite. Things like, well, we're encroaching on them. So we're rapidly making our place urbanized. So we have to exist with our wildlife a lot better than we already do. So here it is, world population growth. Check this out. So 200 million people at 1 AD. 9 billion people projected to be on this earth by 2050. Holy moly. So you can see that right here in 1,500 years, 1,700 years, we've improved a lot of things, right? Medical care, the whole 9 yards. So it's a little bit scary. I don't want to terrify everyone, but let's let this sink in for a minute here. We have a huge loss of species and biodiversity on this planet. Every 20 minutes, we add 3,500 more people and we lose one more species. We have species that haven't even been discovered yet by man that are already gone. 20% of the world's species could be gone in 30 years. Yikes. If we talk about the littlest thing leading to the biggest thing, being able to survive bugs, we've lost huge amounts of insect life, which feeds the larger species and larger species. And believe it or not, that spider we squish has a direct impact on us eventually. We have 75% of our genetic diversity is now lost. It's in agricultural crops. I grew up on a ranch. I know that we started planting GMO foods, or these, or corns, that we now have one species of corn in our fields now, maybe two species in general. What happens when some pest comes in and wipes out that thing? Our whole corn crop is gone across the United States. We have famine, blah, blah, blah. So yikey, yikes. So a little bit scary, but have hope. So what's causing all this craziness? So we have all sorts of things going on. Habitat fragmentation due to our development. I'm on a tree code committee for the city of Sandy. I've lived in the Sandy and Estacada, Eagle Creek area for years. And we used to be so teeny tiny. And now we have this booming folks moving out. We can't afford to live in the city anymore. No one can pay rent anymore. We can't afford to buy a house anymore. So we're moving to the outskirts, and we're having sprawl. By the way, I grew up on 1,000 acres in the California Central Valley, 1,000 acres of cattle ranching ground and crops. It is now 0 lot line homes. 1,000 acres is now completely covered in homes and pavement. So we've got a lot going on there. And it's, can we blame? We need a place to live. Everybody needs a house. We're polluting our land, water, and air. We have introduction of invasive species and disease. So since we started being able to fly over the oceans or crawl over the mountains or ship goods in, we've got a lot of bugs and seeds and things that are coming in. So in this river basin alone, we have a list of invasive weeds alone that I'm on a watch list for. Is 27 early detection rapid response weeds, meaning just 26 weeds that we are worried about exploding into the next ivy and blackberry. So we've got a lot of things moving around on our roads and our tires. And then of course we have climate change. So climate's always changing, right? We go through cold periods and dinosaurs die, or we go through hot periods and other things, and ice caps melt. It's not that the climate isn't changing, it's changing very fast now, faster than we can imagine. So imagine waking up one day only to discover everything that you knew has changed, and the home you've lived in your entire life is gone, that your family and your predecessors have lived in are gone. The roads are much different, making navigation more complicated. You find yourself in areas that are unfamiliar to you. All around you are elements that can easily cause you harm, and there is no escaping. The scenario would be sad and overwhelming for us, and many people would not survive this, right? So yeah, this is what happens every day to our wildlife species. Boy, you didn't know this can be a real bummer on Saturday morning, huh? So it's up to us to learn how to live with these guys. Again, we're kind of in a collision of invasion and frustration and fear. So we want to kind of get over some of our stuff. So, there's a lot of human psychology to our baggage, right? So we're kind of genetically predisposed to have these aversions to certain things. So who here it does not do spiders? Yeah, the hand comes up, right? You'll be glad to know Mary Kay, she relocated a few of she calls them Charlottes, of the Charlottes from here today. How about snakes, snake people? Spiders and snakes. Usually I have a spider or a snake, but not a spider and a snake. And then rats. That can be, wow, nobody here has a rat aversion. This is possibly a first. Well, so we're pretty genetically predisposed to stuff. So I want to talk a little bit about our psychology too here for a minute. The way that we look at animals is oftentimes it's a historical biological thing that we're going through. Way back in our biology, before we were probably wearing these kind of pants and these kind of shoes, we know somewhere in our genetics that there were snakes in some other continent, some other era that could kill us. So we have a genetic memory of those snakes. We genetically remember that these rats caused disease, right? The plagues. So European people, it's very interesting, people of European descent tend to have a very strong aversion to to rats, because that genetically and historically has been something that we knew was a dangerous thing that would cause a plague. Spiders, the same thing. So we still have these things that are very innate within us. And I want to talk a little bit with this too about how we feel things differently. So I like to say I love all of the creatures, but there's one that really freaks me out. It's cockroach. So that is my one. There's only one. But I will tell you that I worked for years as a fish biologist, and we work in cougar country all the time. I've seen a few cougars, I've seen a few bears. That was all fine. I remember walking back down a logging trail with a work partner of mine after a day, and we had our electrofishing equipment with us, and all the hair stood up on the back of my neck. And I went, I don't know what that is. Do you feel that? We felt something. I didn't see anything, we felt something, and looked up and to see a cougar walking alongside the ridge looking down on us. And those are the intrinsic biological things that we carry with us all the time, this feeling like, right, I'm the prey to this thing, so we know to be afraid of it. What's another animal that's coming back into our area that we may have this real biological response to?
Wolf.
Wolf, yeah, totally. You know, we're all for wolf reintroduction, I know. And then it gets here and you're like, oh my God, right? So we have this thing, which is really fascinating. Even our predispositions towards things and being predator or a prey item reflects right down to our gardening style. Can you believe it? So around well, we could even see it here, and it's this a remnant of gardening styles, but you look at this, we are a prey to certain things, so we have a predisposition to want to garden with tall things that we can see through. So I want to be able to have that far sight. So you look at this plantation of trees here, and you can see that I feel very comforted by this. I don't know if other people feel comforted by this. It's a beautiful tree stand. There's a park-like setting. We call it park-like setting. I can see a predator coming from a mile away. It's not the first thing that's in our mind, of course, but it is something that is intrinsically and biologically still within us. I went home last night. Our housemate and I were looking at a big rain garden full of native plants that I made, and it's really filling in, so it looks like a jungle. And she's like, that's kind of sloppy looking. And I'm like, that's awesome. It's hiding place to all kinds of wildlife, but it intrinsically affected her. Like, that's not comforting to me to not be able to see through that. So it's pretty interesting thing when we look at this. So even getting people to change their minds about how they keep their yards and gardens is part of our biology. So we have that for us, so habitat requirements. So I know some of you that are in school have learned your habitat components. So there are 5 things that everything needs to live. And it's not just a human or an ant or a blade of grass. It's a tree, it's whatever. So can you all name one of those components? One thing everything needs to live.
Water.
Water, cool. What's another one? Food, shelter, water. Ooh, then there's 2 other weird things. Let's see if we're getting it. No, because some things can live asexually.
True.
Isn't that crazy? Food, water, shelter, and there are 2 more things. So I'm gonna maybe drop a little hint. Oh, what's that? No, there are worms that live at the bottom of these incredible sulfur vents at the bottom of the ocean that take no oxygen, which is amazing. So they're anoxic and they can live. What's that? No, isn't that amazing? So some things live in the ice. We have microorganisms that live in the ice of the polar ice cap. But what if you and I had to live our whole lives like this together? What's that? Space. We need space. Absolutely. Everybody needs a little space to get their business done, right? And we need all that space and stuff in the right arrangement. What is that, huh? So we need the right arrangement. So if I'm working on fish biology and I gave a fish a thimbleful of water and I gave him 10 pounds of aquatic bugs to eat and a twig, would that be a suitable environment for that salmon? Not so much. Yeah, we can't fit into a thimble, right? If I took an elk and I gave it a pond to live in but fulfilled its other needs, that wouldn't be appropriate either. So everything needs to be in the right arrangement. So when we have global climate change and we have these arrangements that everybody's suited to need, And that starts shifting, like how much water is available? When does this food become available? Oh, is my shelter going away? Then we start to mess with this whole arrangement part. That's where things start to go on their heads. So, all that excitement, how can we help? We need to provide for the habitat needs for a variety of animals and expect a variety of animals. Who here feeds cats outside? Who here feeds raccoons outside with the cats? And skunks and possums and right. So, you know, when we provide habitat components, we're really providing habitat components oftentimes for a whole lot of guys. So I have folks that are like, well, I really want that guy here, but I really don't want that guy here. That guy's eating my roses, deer. And I say, well, you know, what do I do about the deer wanting to eat my roses? I'm like, stick more roses in there. Sharing's caring. So, so let's talk about biology for just a second. So every living thing here, every living, I should say, respiring thing, it has a different kind of selection. So, so we're either R-selected or K-selected. So R-selected critters make a whole lot of kids. So we can look at this little clam, 500 million babies a year. Ooh. That's why I'm not a parent. 8,200 frogs a year, 12 a year, and then we're moving over to the K selection, and we might have one or two, or one every 5 years, or one every 10 years. So, and I always say, how did I memorize this in college? I was like, R-selected, really lots of kids. And really providing a lot of food for other things. K-selection's like, K, maybe one's good, maybe two, maybe every 5 years is good too. So we have R-selected and K-selected things. So the R-selected critters tend to crank out a lot of kiddos. They tend to be a food source for other things. They tend to mature quickly and be precocial, and we'll go over that in a minute. And then our K-selected guys, their babies take a lot of care to grow up. I need to teach you how to hunt. I may need to, you may be incapable of doing anything for a while, so I have to provide for all of your needs. So who here's had experience with K-selected creatures in their lives? Right, are you all parents? Yes, right, so K-selected. So we're the craziest K-selected, right? Our K-selection little young are blobs of naked crying thing that can't roll over, walk, talk. We provide for everything that they need, so we're very K-selected. So let's look at how these guys exist in the environment. So this is kind of fun. It's called a sigmoidal curve. It's very scientific. Here's our timeline. This is population growth over time. So our K species go up to this thing called carrying capacity. And carrying capacity is exactly where a population wants to land. So they're going to hover there, and everybody's going to live happy and mostly have all of their needs met. So these guys started a couple of them, and then they wham, their population may grow pretty big, and then they plateau out right on that carrying capacity line. If we were to zoom way in, you'll see a little bit of boop, boop, boop above and below it. Our R species, however, let's take field mice and voles, for example. Those guys, boom, and they go flying over the top of their carrying capacity. Ah! And then suddenly there's no food, or there's a disease, or something comes down, and it just clobbers the entire population. And they drop way down below it again, and then they do that. So it's like I call it a like R-selected roller coaster ride. So if anyone here has lived on property and you've had, say, a year of gobs of field mice, you may be like, there's so many mice out here this year, I can't believe it. Then the next year, there are no mice, but oh my God, there's so many voles out here this year. So oftentimes we have R-selected species that trade with each other, right? So they may have just slightly different niches in the world, that they may go through their boom and bust, and the other guy who's got a slightly different niche is going to go, yay, and they're going to come up and populate. So sometimes we have this whole thing going on here with different species. I know on my farm, 1 year is usually redback voles, and they're crazy, and I can't understand how there are so many. And then the next year, field mice, or the next year is rabbits. So we have a lot of that interesting stuff going on.
Susan,
yes, sir.
What's the etymology of K and R?
K and R, something way smarter than I can remember after 20 years after college. So, but I'd be happy to look that up for you. So we talked a little bit about precocial and altricial, right? So we have from zero parental care to lots of parental care. So look at these peacocks out here, right? So these guys, you think they have their babies and they're pretty darn super precocial. They hatch from their egg like a chicken, and within just minutes they're up, they're dry, and they're like, I think I need to peck at the ground. And then, oh, that tasted pretty good. And they're feeding themselves instantly, running around, able to take care of their own needs. So mom's got really nothing more to do than to keep them wrangled, keep them safe, and keep them warm at night. Then we move over to super altricial things. So that's the little guy, the little naked bird in the nest, right? He's got nothing going for him. He's going to lay there. His eyes won't even be open for a week. He's going to, intrinsically know he needs to beg and scream and get fed, much like sometimes our super altricial human babies, right? So that, again, this is all resources that these guys need to provide these babies to get them going. So you can probably imagine that these super precocial guys can have a whole lot more kids than these super altricial ones, because they're like, you're gone, let's go. Let me give you an example. A brush rabbit, one of our local little bunnies, they can have babies. Those babies at a week old are ready to hop around. At 2 weeks old are ready to more or less be off nursing, feeding themselves. They have a whole lot of them, right? So that makes them R-selected. And then they're off becoming a meal. And mom might say, no one's getting a name here because maybe one of you will make it to adulthood to carry this whole thing on. The super altricial guys, lots of resources. And there's a lot of suffering that a parent goes through. Suffering, I use that term lightly, but there's a lot of sacrifice that a parent will go through with an altricial creature. So again, any of you that have raised altricial creatures realize that feeding yourself comes after the baby. So you may run around hungry, you may run around unshowered, you may run around with the same pants on you've had for 8 days because the baby's needs need to come first, and you get to slide everything else, all your needs in afterwards. So let's talk about mammals. So we've got all these, precocial and altricial things in mammal world. Little deer needs to be up and ready to roll after he's born. Super altricial, this little pumpkin right there. And that little pumpkin right there, some of our pouched mammals have post-embryonic babies. So their young are actually an embryo. So they're born almost embryonic. And they crawl basically blindly up into the pouch, and then there's a nipple in the pouch that they nurse on until they can become mobile. So things like our kangaroos, our opossums, that's right. So these guys have incredibly altricial little kiddos, right? So housing, and we're going to roll into mammals for a minute here. Does anyone have any question? I will say this is a conversation, so anything you have to say, and if you don't agree with me, you just go ahead and say so. I'm perfectly happy with that. I'll never argue, and I learn a lot from all of you during these classes too, which is really fun. Moving into the mammal world, mammals will live in burrows, nests, under shrubs, fallen standing dead wood. If anyone's seen or read Never Cry Wolf, right, in the beard of the guy up there in the Arctic Circle, so they'll live almost anywhere. I have quite a few mammals living in my roof right now, which is unfortunate. What makes a mammal a mammal? Well, what are we? Are we mammals? Yes. Okay, good. Anyone here not a mammal? Okay, uh-oh. We'll talk after class. So what makes a mammal a mammal? Well, we're all warm-blooded, which means that we eat food and we produce our heat from the inside, unlike a reptile that needs to eat food, and then they produce their heat from the outside by laying across a rock or pavement. We're fur-bearing, and yes, even we're fur-bearing, so I'm not a very hairy individual, but we have fur. It's just as we've evolved and put pants and shirts on, we've needed less fur. We bear live young, mostly. So here's a quiz question for everyone. What do you mean mostly? Egg-laying mammal? Platypi. Wow, good job. And there's one more. Do you know the other one?
I don't remember.
He lives in the same area as a platypus, and that's the Spiny echidna. So we have two mammals that are egg-laying mammals. They're a complete throwback. I think God had like an extras pile. I was like, just make something out of that. And make a new too, right? In Africa, that's all spare parts. So we also have this crazy thing. We have 3 floating bones in our ears that make, and only mammals have those. So what is that? The hammer, the stirrup, and the anvil. Right, exactly. So we have these 3 floating bones. Birds don't have it, right? Reptiles and herps don't have that. But most of all, we're milk producing, right? So again, we're feeding our young. So this is what makes mammals a mammal. I had someone really get into an argument with me once. Wait a minute, pigeons make milk. There's something called pigeon milk. It's basically their regurgitation. I was like, well, it's a little different milk, but those are mammals. So we're going to kind of cruise through some of these locals. If anybody has a fun story, thought, or argument on any of these critters, let me know. We're going to go through, rodents. We have a lot of them out here. The deer family, we've got quite a few as well. And these guys are the quintessential meal. So they're the guys that are eaten.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is nutria from this area or is
No, it's a South American rodent.
South America?
Yeah, South
We
America.
were having that discussion this morning because I saw
Some nutria. They look like old Scotsmen. We'll look at those in a few minutes, which is really great because we'll talk a little bit about invasive species because they're kind of at the top of it. So out here in the area, we have black-tailed deer. At the mouth of the Columbia River down towards towards Astoria, we have a really rare, wonderful threatened deer called the Lower Columbia white-tailed deer, which is its own unique population. Pretty cool stuff. This guy's the greeter at Oxbow Park. I was going to actually teach a tracking class there, and I thought he looked like an animatronic greeter there. Welcome to Oxbow. We also have Roosevelt Elk, which is the largest deer we have in the area. So this guy's a big guy. If anybody's been around Rosies, they are ginormous and quite fantastic creatures too. We have rodents going to the smaller size. We have animals that these chipmunks, gray squirrels, foxes, flyings, Douglas squirrels, or chickarees, which we may hear some today. And then at the very top, we have this California ground squirrel. And before any cracks about migration come up, yeah, they did come up from California. With climates shifting and things getting a little bit warmer and more applicable, we've always had California ground squirrels here, but only a few of them, and their populations are moving more northerly along with others as the climate shifts. So we have a lot of those suckers now. Those are the guys that are hanging out in the ground. So that's California ground squirrel.
They've always been in Southern Oregon.
What's that? Yes, and they're moving up to northern Oregon and Washington now. So that's a little guy, a little fat guy, super cute, checkerboard back. That's our ground squirrel. Funny story. Here's a little side note on the ground squirrel. So I did a lot of wildlife rehab for a long time. I rehabbed a ground squirrel. It released itself from a cage on my farm a bunch of years ago, and oh no, I think he was ready to go then. Oh well, good luck to him. And my neighbor called me and said, that got the weirdest thing going on. My labs are barking their brains out at a squirrel who's standing at the bottom of a tree just looking at the tree. And I said, oh, I know where my ground squirrel is. So these guys don't go up trees. They're not the tree guys. So we have western gray squirrels. Western gray squirrels, fully gray, and they're super shy guys. So those guys that are mugging you for peanuts, those are the eastern gray squirrel, and you can see the tail of the eastern gray is a little bit redder. So when we talk about these invasive species, I'm shoving them in here too for you. There's an eastern gray squirrel, a little bit more red on them. So those are the guys that'll most likely be in your yard shaking you down for seeds. We also have fox squirrels. Those are the big red guys. Anybody have fox squirrels in their vicinity? Yeah? Those are fun ones too. They're the size of a small tank. And then we have flying squirrels. Who's old enough for that guy? I always date myself with some of this stuff. So we have flying squirrels, but not that flying squirrel. We have that flying squirrel. There's one in his native habitat. They have terrible, terrible taste in housing decoration. So now I actually pulled this off the internet. I was trying to get a view of a flying squirrel actually soaring. They don't fly, they don't flap. They've got this really fantastic musculature and skin structure that allows them to spread out their side skin and sail down from trees. So they'll climb a tree, they'll sail across. from those great big eyes, do you think he's up at night or during the day? Night, yeah. So these are pretty nocturnal. So if you get a chance to see a flying squirrel, super duper. They're everywhere, but they're hard to see because they are nocturnal. So can you find the flying squirrel there? That's my hair. So my cat Cletus came in with a flying squirrel one night, and it was in shock, so I tried to warm it up a little bit, and then it came out of shock and ran up into my own hair. And let's see if we can, whoop. There it is right there. So that was all very pleasant to let him recoup in there until I pulled him down and found a huge population of mites and fleas on him, and so I took a shower. So here's our smallest local squirrel that we have. This is the Douglas squirrel. The chicory is the local vernacular for it. He's a little gray guy, and he really loves to hang out up in Doug fir trees. You'll find them in fir trees more than any of our hardwood trees because they love to eat those Doug fir nuts out of the cones. So signs from these guys, you'll hear a little chit, 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 chit. May sound a little bit like a bird. So people sometimes are like, what bird is yelling at me? It's generally that squirrel. Interestingly enough, that squirrel's call, its alarm call, is letting everybody else, all kinds of other species, know that there might be a threat in the area too. So super fun that that's working across species. You'll also find little garbage heaps at the bottom of some of these Doug fir trees too, where you're going to find just the gilled out fir cones. And you may find, I found 3 and 4 foot high fir cone piles that these guys will pick a favorite branch and just knock it off. So they're pretty fabulous little fellas. Pocket gopher. So, farmer's friend, right? Pocket gophers make a big old hole. Having had lived in New England for 10 years and having had holes from marmots, it's not that big. So this is our pocket gopher. He's the guy that might be going for some of the roots in your garden. And this is a pocket gopher getting done to him what they love, which is having his cheeks pulled apart. Just kidding. So this is, so pocket gopher is a pocket gopher because he's got pockets in his cheeks. So they actually have 2 sets of lips, which is really fascinating. You can see how much he's loving this thing. So they have an interior set of cheeks that they can pull down around all of their teeth but their incisors. They have a second set of cheeks on the outside. It's furred on the inside that they can use to store dirt. Their job with those amazing claws is to dig their tunnels, and then they can stash that the soil in there, and they also stash it in their front legs, and they bring it up to their mound and push it out. That's how they make their land. You can also see that those teeth are pretty brown, and if you look behind you on the table, if anyone's in the vicinity of a table wants to grab if you can see a rodent with really red-brown incisors, you can lift it up. Anyone seeing one there?
Behind the clipboard. Yep. It's full of iron.
So lots of enamel on those teeth, huge amounts of enamel. So I think that's a beaver. All rodents have big, big enameled teeth because they chew and chew and chew. Their teeth are also perpetually growing. So they'll grow and grow and grow and grow throughout their lifetime. And you'll see that these teeth on this beaver are set way back near its eye sockets because those teeth are always going to grow because they're always getting worn down. So here's a gopher doing what he does best. He's digging his hole. You can see his cheeks are full. And he's pushing that dirt up through the hill. And if you want a fun little factoid or a fun little trivia thing you can teach all of your friends, when you see what looks like a molehill or something on your lawn, I always hear people saying, stupid moles. Well, the moles will make a molehill that looks like a volcano. It's going to be evenly distributed on all sides. A gopher's hole, they always push out in one direction. So it'll be oblong. It'll be shaped like a fried egg. So it's going to be shorter in the back and longer in the front. So fun things to entertain yourself with on a slow day. Is that a gopher? Is that a mole? And the gopher holes, of course, are going to be a bit bigger. Speaking of the devil, there's a mole. Moles get a bad rap, which is such a bummer for me. They're insectivorous rodents, or they're insectivores, excuse me, they're not rodents, they're insectivores. with amazing little hole digging feet. Look at those suckers. They have man hands, I call it. And then these guys are great aerators of the soil. So they get the crummy wrap all the time. Like these guys are aerating your soil. They're eating pests out of the soil. They do eat quite a bit of worms too. These guys are so fantastic because they spend so much time underground. Their eyes are greatly reduced. They're almost blind if they come to the surface. They also have fur that sticks straight out of their pore so they can move both directions in their hole. Their holes are not much bigger than them. So if you find a mole on the ground, brush its fur both ways. It's like velvet. So they've got the ability to move both directions underground without getting their, quote, fur brushed back. Not necessarily. They're mostly insects. And so when we talk about herbivores and carnivores and things, I always say they're mostlies because not everybody's a fully. I have cats that I like to think are all carnivorous, and then I catch them chewing on grass. Same thing with dogs. So everybody needs a little greens in their life. And oddly enough, even animals that are considered vegetarians or herbivores sometimes will eat meat, insects, rodents, you name it. Anybody have chickens at home? Chickens? Yeah. So do your chickens ever go for the errant, hapless mouse running through the coop or nothing like that? I've had chickens that were velociraptors for rodents sometimes. So, yeah.
Is it fair to say that if you have moles, you have very healthy soil?
Yes. I would say it's either very healthy or it's becoming very healthy.
Exactly.
So we get, my neighborhood is hysterical. We all have equines, so we all have horses, mules, and donkeys. And everybody freaks out. They get a whole, got to use the mole rocket or whatever it is with a little bullet in the top and all these things. And they're like, what are you doing? This is helping to aerate your soil. And the holes are never big enough to trap a foot. So I'd say let them rip. I kick a lot of molehills over. But again, our aesthetics sometimes get in the way of our separation of our living with that wildlife and understanding its greater point. So go forth, spread the word. Moles are great guys. Live it up. Don't trap them. Kick that dirt over. Have fun. So there's our mole hole, right? Nice volcano. All right, rats and mice. So we've got a lot of local rats and mice around here. I won't read them all off. But on the left side are our New World. We're considered the New World, FYI. New World mice and rats. And then on the right side are the Old World rats and mice. And where's the Old World? England. Yes, England, according to us Europeans. The Old World is England. And how did those suckers get over here? Ships, you got it. They came over on boats. They came over on ships and ballast. This is like the earliest invasive species ever. They probably came over on the Mayflower. So those guys came over, found lots of resources here that they could use to live, and they had an edge on some of our New World guys and went nuts. So here's one of our local guys, deer mouse. They're fabulous. Again, this is one of those really, really lot species, right? The R's, so it's going right over the carrying capacity. But because I have velociraptors for chickens, they keep those in check and get the populations back down. These guys feed everybody. Everybody eats these things. So they kind of, I feel a little bit bad for the deer mice. But again, big old eyes. So nocturnal or diurnal, meaning day liver or night liver. Yeah, nocturnal. You got it. And then here's the redback vole. That's the guy who exchanges places with this guy. And so mouse one year, redback vole the next year. They fulfill similar niches, minus one or two little categories. So if we get some great winters around here when the snow melts off and you see all that grass is down and there are a lot of tunnels going through the grass, those guys. Yes.
They kind of look like smaller guinea pigs.
They totally do. I think they totally look like little guinea pigs. They got no tail. They got a little nubbin for a tail. And I know that if you lift some things up, sometimes in the garden, you'll surprise a lot of redback voles that are under there. This is the worst picture ever. I keep saying this every year for like 10 years. This is a terrible picture. I need a better picture of a muskrat. And then I leave this picture up. So in rodent world, so we're working from little to bigger, right? So muskrat about this big, also fun guys. They eat vegetation. They love to live in aquatic areas. They build dens in the sides of creeks and ponds and things like that. Not big ones, little ones. So they're beneficial, in my opinion, to the area. They'll keep some of the vegetation down. They're pretty harmless. And there are mid-sized aquatic rodent.
Is the muskrat the same as a river otter or are they different?
Different fellas. So river otter is super carnivorous.
Okay.
They're just, yeah, and much sleeker. They're kind of like the triathlete of this guy's kind of like the couch potato of rodents. So, and then we have our wood rat, which is our local native wood rat. So this guy, I think they're fabulous. So he doesn't look very ratty. He's kind of adorable, isn't he? He's got a big furry tail. He's not the size of a rat. He's maybe this long in his body. He is so neat and tidy that he has the white gloves for the white glove test, right? So I don't think this is an appropriate place. The wood rat is also known as a pack rat. So has anybody experienced the old pack rat situation at their, yeah. So I chronically get wood rats in our well houses because our well houses in the area, if anyone's got one, we're insulating the daylights out of it all the time, keep the well pump from freezing. And they love to live in insulation. So you put your stuff up one winter and you come back in the spring and it's all on the ground. That's the wood rats. Found it beneficial. So here we are on Old World, moving to these guys. So Norway rat up here is brown. Black rat is sometimes black, but not always. So they can be a variety of different colors. This is Rattus norvegicus, and this is Rattus rattus. A rat so nice they named it twice, right? So again, going back to that like super intrinsic stuff that we have going on in our lives, like, oh God, rats, subway rats, terrible sewer rats, and the awful rats, because these guys were the ones that carried the plague. Anybody see any monster rats in your world? Any fantastic, mind-bending New York City subway? Matthew. Yeah, some biggest rats I've ever seen. New York City subway, first time in there. Fascinating. They were magnificent.
There's big ones in Portland.
Oh, we have big ones in Portland? I haven't met the big ones yet in Portland. So we malign these here big time, right, as Europeans. But what's maligned here might be sacred here.
India.
Yep, that's India. You got it. Do you know what town that is in India? Do you remember what town? So I'll tell you a little story of these rats. So in a village in India, legend has it that one of the rulers of the villages of this village in India a millennia ago had a very sick child, and this child was their pride and joy. And he prayed to Khatri Matas, who was one of the deities there, and he said, "Please save my child." And Khatri Matas said, "I will save your child, but the deal is," because there's always a deal when we have some deity or God. So the deal is, if I save your child, all of the villagers will be reincarnated as rats. Deal, he says. Sold. So from that day on, they built temples honoring the rats who are known as their ancestors. So children go, everybody reveres the rat there. I'm not saying that necessarily happens in all of India, but here in this village, it's the ancestors.
Northern India, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't know in India. One of my bucket list worlds is to go to India and go to this temple here and revere the rats. But it's a really interesting thing. Again, as we look at perspectives of us as Americans or folks in India, or what people utilize as food or as gods or as family. We have to know that we're all sitting in different camps and sometimes sitting in different spaces, and our experience with these guys, again, think our biology. So, how cute is that guy? So, anybody know what this thing is? I've got its name above, but it's not usually known as that here. So this is Oplodontia. It's also known as a mountain beaver. And mountain beavers, I had never experienced such a kind of a rift in humanity as when I moved out here and started talking to folks in the forestry and logging business. So who have a real, this is a very vile creature to them. So an Oplodontia is a pretty adorable little creature, and he is, they live in forests, they live down in root wads and have dens down in root wads there. I call them farmers. They farm forbs. This guy's actually sitting around a pile of his own forbs. And they haul that in, and they tend to go into something called a torpor over the winter, so they don't go into a full Why am I doing this? I'm so decaffeinated. They don't go into a full slumber. They kind of slow down all their systems and move slowly throughout the winter and stay in their den. So they eat all of their haystacks that they put in there. So they have a very important niche in the forest system, and that they're also aerating soil, and they're also taking care of some of the forb overgrowth that might happen. When we clear cut, as in logging operations, what happens to the forb layer there when we clear cut stuff? Yeah, it goes away. Yeah, so all those tender forbs that are used to growing up in shaded areas go away. Ablodontia looks a little sad, gets a little hungry. Someone comes through, they replant little seedling firs. The softest thing in the forest now is the apical meristem, or the very tip of that seedling fir. Little guy goes, I'll eat this. If it's the only thing around, kills every fir in sight. So, so the real benefit of selective logging is that you spare and save some space for these mountain beavers. You're able to bring your timber off your land. You keep the habitat intact in areas for these guys. So we oftentimes have a judgment as we're living with wildlife or choosing not to live with wildlife about saying, that guy's a bad guy. And I'm like, well, why is it a bad guy? Why is it doing this? Well, what's it usually do? And what do we just take away? So what one of those habitat requirements are we taking away?
The problem is, however, you plant the trees and you leave forbs around, they still will eat your fruit.
Still might eat your fruit. They might eat your fruit trees. So I know we do a lot of restoration here, and I know Bill has too. We use things called plant protection, so it's kind of a plastic webbing, so you can protect against mountain beavers with that initially, and then you've got other critters when the plants get bigger that are going to want to utilize that too. So I was doing some work at a property up on Suter Creek, further up the watershed here earlier this week, and they do a whole lot of this, moving the plant protection up. So now it's not the mountain beavers they're going to eat. Now it's the deer they're going to browse it. So I pull it up. So we're always trying to, provide enough food for everybody and save enough of what we're working on.
Something comes along and eats the stem around the
That's right. Yeah. So we're always doomed. I love it. So this is our brush rabbit. What kind of selection is he? Really lots. This guy is the meal. They're not the brightest bulbs in the box either. So when they run from predators, they run in circles. And what happens when you're a smart predator? You just stop and yeah. So these guys, brush rabbits are amazing, and all the Savellaceae family, all the rabbit family is fascinating in that they make so many babies because they are the feeders of everybody. They go through something called a birth estrus. So the minute they give birth, boom, they're back in estrus again. They can breed immediately, more babies. The minute the one set's out, the next set's coming. So they're a good feeding program for everybody. This is a Townsendshrew, yet another terrible picture of a blob of something. Our shrew species, we have a few small shrew species. They're pretty tiny. My cats are habitual shrew hunters. I wish they'd be habitual mouse hunters, but what can I do? These guys love to live in forested areas and moist areas. They're insectivorous. So who here, you look like a person who can eat a ton of food and never put on any weight, right? Are you an eater? I used to be an eater like that too. So this is like a shrew. I call it a shrew-like metabolism. So they have to eat every 15 minutes. They're running so hot and so fast that if they don't eat or if they get stressed, they could die. So years ago, I did something called a grid trapping program. So I was looking at who was living at the forest floor. So I had little live traps set up. And it was in New England. It's the dead of the winter, and I'm cold because I'm from California. And I'm sitting out there doing this, and I have to check the traps every 30 minutes because if I don't check it every 30 minutes, if I catch one of those guys, they'll stress out and die in a heartbeat. So I'm running my trap line every 30 minutes in the dead of the winter so I don't freak this poor guy out. Every 15 minutes, got to eat. Northern water shrew, amazing. His protection for himself is he's poisonous. I love it. So he's got some poison spines on the inside of his feet. Predators learn real quick that they don't want to eat that guy. He is down in wetlands and streams. Again, super shrew-like metabolism.
Is that an already native?
Yeah. And then here's the one we see the most is a northern short-tailed shrew, Blurina brevicata is that guy's name. He's munching on a grasshopper there, so they're great. These are great pest control fellows. So I always say, leave the shrews alone. They're great at pest control. And then we have this, speaking of Mother of the Year, right? So who's this? Possum, yeah, opossum. So now the jury's out as to whether these things are native or not. This has been a conversation for, for the ages around here. It's called the Virginia opossum, FYI. So there are stories that say that these are not native species around here. They're brought over, get this, in the turn of the century as pets. Now, how many people have an aversion to the opossum? Yeah. Not so much, yeah. It's the naked tail, I'm sure of it. They have 50 teeth, the most teeth of any mammal we've got. 50 very pointy teeth too, and I'll find a skull for you at some point. But they are fantastically adapted to survive. So, and why? Because you have 7 kids hanging off of you, I'm not sure. But this is a pouched mammal. This is North America's only pouched mammal. So instead of having a pouch like a kangaroo, they have a set of pouches down the side, and I think my next slide will show that. There we go. And they also give birth to kind of pre-developed babies, which crawl up through the fur, latch onto a teat, and then they continue to develop. So they'll continue to develop, and their eyes aren't open; they're just hanging out, growing up. And when they get too big for that, then they crawl on mom's back, and that's where they hang out for a while. And she carries them, bless her heart. So I think she gets Mother of the Year. What adaptation do you know a possum has to keep from getting offed? Yeah, playing dead, playing possum. So this is another amazing piece of biology that they have, and so that I wish I had too. They get afraid, and their endorphin system gets overrun. It just floods, and they pass out. Poof. And that's it. They pass out. Not only they pass out, but their tongue rolls out. They let loose some musk, and they poop and pee all over themselves, which makes you super unappetizing to anybody that's trying to eat you. And they're like, it's dead, it's covered in its own waste, its tongues are rolling, it smells bad, and usually a predator will walk away. It's kind of a dreamy deal. After about 5 minutes, they come to, and usually the threat's gone, and they waddle off. They're pretty slow on the ground, right? They have a prehensile tail. They're great in the trees, so they do really well in the trees. They do lousy on the ground. Yeah.
Does the prehensile, does that mean that it locks and they don't have any, explain that.
Yeah, prehensile, kind of like our hands. It's like a 5th hand. So they can grip onto a tree, they can hold on to a branch, they can use very muscular, so they can use that to help balance themselves. So it's their 5th leg, as I call it.
I've always wondered though, are they, like if we hold on to something, we have to, hold on.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if it's something like where that they could put it on something and it would automatically grip without them having to hold on, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I'll have to ask them next time. I'm not sure. That's a great question. They can wrap it around a branch.
You think it just fall off if they're not holding on anymore.
If you're not thinking about it, I just fall out of a tree in a second. So I have a friend who rehabilitates these, and she has a few as pets that she uses for educational animals, and they'll wrap their tails around her hand, and she can hold on, and they'll just hang. So they're pretty powerful critters. So I have a big appreciation for the possum. They also eat massive amounts of pests, mass amounts. Yes?
Don't they keep their body temperature, their resting body temperature lower than pretty much any other mammal? And that's why they don't really get rabies, because rabies can't live in their bodies.
I didn't know that. Really? That's amazing.
I can't remember. They keep their body temperature so low that rabies can't really live in them, because people don't like them because they're like, oh, they have rabies, but they don't, and then they eat like ticks and stuff like that, so they're really beneficial to the environment.
Yeah, thank you for that. Wow, I had no idea. That is brilliant. I know that they're slow mowers, so I wouldn't imagine that they would have a high core body temperature. And you're right. As a horse person, there's a lot of debate all the time about the opossum on the farm. So they eat a mass amount of ticks and pests they also spread a disease called equine paralytic myelitis, EPM. So, and that's if they poop in the grass and it becomes hay and it, and the horse ingests a certain amount of it. So we sometimes, because we're predators, we tend to get really fixated on certain things as humans. I'll talk about eyes in a minute. And sometimes we grab onto the thing that EPM might be a thing, but it's almost non-existent in the area. So I know a lot of livestock owners and a lot of horse owners are like, no possums. I'm like, that's barely a thing. So that's brilliant. I'll have to look deeper into that. I did not know. Well, there's the kids again. All right, we have black bears here. We used to have grizzly bears sort of in the general vicinity, but we went ahead and killed all those guys off. So now we just have black bears. Black bears are pretty harmless bears unless you get between mom and who? The children's, right? Yeah, exactly. So just in interacting with that kind of wildlife, I've encountered gobs of black bears from here to Alaska. Really, it's just about just standing still and making a goodly amount of noise. They're quite shy folks. If you're standing there and you see mom, you make a goodly amount of noise and the kids are hugging your leg, you're on your own. So, as a matter of fact, black bears is such a very large animal that we have in this area. These guys exist seasonally off of the food that's available. So they'll exist off of mainly grubs, insects, can you believe it, berries, vegetation. So a good portion of their life is eating that kind of stuff. The carnivorous end of their world is pretty small. So I'm always impressed by black bears at the fact that they can pull so much nutrition out of so little.
They're in our orchard now.
Yeah, eating your apples probably, right? Yeah, working the apple trees over. Bear, we can see when we take our walk, we can see what season it is for anything. Burgerville has its blackberry season and it's Walla Walla sweet season. And if you are a wildlife person, you're walking around looking at poop, it's like it's blackberry season and it's apple season. It all comes out in the wash. This is a bear's rear foot. I was teaching that tracking class the animatronic deer was at Oxbow Park. Went down to the bar and to take care of some business and went around a corner and there's this fabulous foot. So this is a rear left, so a left hind of a bear. That's a quarter for comparison. So there was a big sow down there and she was teaching her youngsters to hunt for crawfish. So turning over rocks, finding crawfish, again, lots of little things to nourish a big thing. A lot of our large predators eat a lot of little things instead of one big thing.
They're basically omnivores.
Yeah, they are omnivores. So as a matter of fact, if we go back to omnivore to this, there's a half of a skull back there right in the middle of the table. It's laying on its side. Can you grab that? So that's a black bear skull. If you hold it up and flip those teeth towards us a little bit, you can see that they have canine teeth in the front. And in the back of that jaw, you can see that they have teeth that look suspiciously like ours. So as a true omnivore, they have incisors for cutting, they've got canines for ripping, and then their rear teeth are buodont teeth. It's the same kind of teeth that we have, kind of pillowy. So if you reach your tongue back of mouth, you can feel that we have kind of pillowy teeth in the back for grinding up vegetation. So these guys are well equipped for everything. Oddly enough, we're well equipped for everything too. We've got incising teeth, we've got canine teeth, greatly reduced since we've been cooking food, meats, and then we have our buodont teeth for grinding.
And they're basically a big dog.
Big dog.
They're like,
Speaking of big dog, here's a raccoon in its native habitat. Just kidding. So this is a raccoon. Procyon lotor is his Latin name if you want to get specific about it. Raccoons are an animal that's really learned to live with us. So raccoons, again, when we started moving into their area, they just found resources that they could utilize. So a lot of the resources they could utilize are trash bins, our cat food, sometimes our cats. So they're very diverse in their ability to eat different foods. Is that guy eating our junk food leftovers and Fage yogurt a good plan? Well, no, not necessarily for him, but we have to acknowledge that as we're living with wildlife, that they're going to come and live with us. So if we don't want that kind of mayhem going on in our household, we'll want to seal up trash. Since we talked about It's blackberry season here in Oregon. Raccoons have a really unique way. They have their own potty, right? So we pointed out the bathrooms over here. Raccoons will find a particular tree, a particular area, and as a group, they may use that mostly as a restroom. So they're pretty tidy fellas. The same quarter, that poor quarter, it's stuck next to. Here's a quarter and poop. Here's a quarter and poop. That is the raccoons here have been eating a lot of berries. You can see their scat's pretty red at that point, so we can always tell who it is and what they're munching on primarily. As a matter of fact, as a wildlife biologist, people think we spend a lot of time with the animal, and I'm like, we spend so much time with poop that and habitat that we don't typically see the animal, but there's a lot of sign. Speaking of sign, we got that guy right there. This is a striped skunk. We have 2 skunks in our area. We have striped skunks and we have spotted skunks, which are really cool. Has anyone seen a spotted skunk? Where'd you see a spotted skunk?
Oh, I used to work in zoos and stuff like that, so I've worked with a lot of these things that we've gone over so far.
Oh, fabulous. Oh my gosh, that's exciting. Yeah, the spotties are really amazing. And I have yet to see one in the wild. It'll be
Oh yeah, I haven't seen one in a while.
bucket list item right there. So striped skunk, what's his superpower, guys? Spraying, yeah. So the skunks are pretty slow too, and they've got poor eyesight. They're not great at attacking you if they're being threatened with the front end, but they're in the mustelid or weasel family, so they're great at coming around with the back end. So everybody's got a superpower to help them stay alive. This guy obviously is his scent. So everybody in the weasel family, the mustelids, all have a lot of musty odor, right? Musk. So these guys have some pretty well-developed musk glands in the back. I will tell you, I've worked with skunks. I have rehabilitated skunks. I have done soft release on skunks. The only time I've ever been sprayed by a skunk is when I had a passel of little kids that call it soft releasing, where I was teaching them how to hunt out of a stream, and they were play fighting with each other, and my leg got in the way. So, and there's not a lot of spritz on a baby, which is nice. But really, it takes a lot to get sprayed by a skunk, a lot. So when we're interacting with wildlife, we need to have some sensitivity to know when we're starting to get its attention and when we've outrun our boundaries with them. So, yeah. So, depends on how fast you're coming on them. That range can get real small if they get surprised really quickly. So I live with several skunks on my property. I have dogs. We've never been sprayed. The dogs walk by. The skunks go about their business. It's all pretty mellow. So we'll talk a little bit about boundaries and barriers a little bit later. There's our western spotted skunk. Is that the cutest? I know, right? Oh, how can you ever spray me? Look at you. So we've got lots of amazing bats here. Bats, some of my very favorite people. Bats are in the order of Chiroptera, so it means hand wing. Go figure, it means hand wing. So I went on a date with a guy once. I said, "What's your favorite bird?" He said, "My favorite bird's a bat." And that was my last date with him. And we know that bats are mammals. They're flying mammals, and they do flap. So they're oftentimes very tiny. We have a lot of bat baggage around here too, and media does a lot for our bat baggage. What gave us a bunch of bat baggage, you think, over time? Yeah, vampires. Oh,
Rabies.
yeah, rabies gives us bat baggage. We've got bat baggage to spare around here. So first, it's so ugly. It doesn't look like anything I've known. Oh my God, it carries rabies. Oh, it's gonna suck my blood. So I worked at, when I first moved to this state, I worked at the Audubon Society, and I did field classes, and I had someone, an adult, come along on a field class. Again, it's important for us to understand these guys so that we can appreciate them and not be afraid of them. And that I was showing a little brown bat, little brown myotis, preserved. It was this big, and the adult said, "They'll suck your blood, every one of them." And I said, "Wow." And the kids just were terrified. And I said, this is how quickly we can change someone from fascination to fear. The minute we stop thinking, the minute we don't take a breath and learn the facts, right? That applies in all of life, right? So it took a while to calm the kids down and let them know that every bat we have up here is basically an insectivorous bat. So they're the bomb diggity, as I like to call it. One single bat can eat 1,500 mosquitoes per night. One bat, 1,500 mosquitoes. Best friend, mine, right there. Pretty cool. So this is our little brown myotis. He's our smallest bat. Yeah.
If you go down to Portland at night, on Sandy Boulevard, down near where the freeway is, stand next to a light and look up. You'll see sometimes hundreds of them.
Fantastic. So Sandy Boulevard by the overpass?
By any overpass or
That's
down
right.
by what used to be the Gulch. And they're just, usually you look up and you'll see lots of them just flitting around above the lights.
That's such brilliance. And here's some brilliance in all that is that even though we're paving the planet, we're providing habitat for certain animals that may not have had habitat before. These guys tend to be cave dwellers, or they tuck themselves into the grooves of bark of very old trees. Now that we don't have a whole lot of very old trees anymore, they're moving more towards being cave dwellers. We build impeccable caves in the form of overpasses for these guys. So some of our buildings, same thing with our peregrine falcons in Portland. We've created a great cliff habitat for peregrine falcons and what they eat, which is pigeons. So we can see the boom of some of our species out there, which is really cool. This is our smallest bat. It's the western pipistrelle. So cute. And then here's our biggest bat, which is the hoary bat. We have 15 species of bat in Oregon here, which is pretty cool. Check this out. We are 1/4 of a mile from all 15 species, plus a few rare and errant species that live in a 10,000-year-old rock fall right on the outside of 224, a location of which I have been sworn to secrecy on. But if you go to OPB and you look at there's a program on bats that they did it right there at this gentleman's place. So we have a lot of fabulous bats here. It behooves us to keep them. Like I said, they eat a lot of flying insects and a lot of pests. Echolocation. So these guys are big echolocators because they're nocturnal, they're not looking at things, and because mosquitoes might be this big in the pitch dark, it's really hard to see them. So they make the high-pitched sounds that bounce off an object, even an object this big, and then they listen to the echo of the sound coming back, which is quite unbelievable. So we say blind as a bat. They're not really blind. I'm blind as a bat. They're not really blind. It's just the time that they're up and what they're doing. So they navigate well that way. If anyone's had a bat in their house, no one gets a bat in their hair because that bat knows exactly where you are in space, which is pretty nifty. So how big can their wings get? So this hoary bat right here is the largest bat in Oregon. It has a wingspan of almost 16 inches. Fantastic. In the wintertime, they need to hibernate. So in the wintertime, they bring their body processes way, 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 way down. We have fewer insects. That's where they go hide in those caves, which are a really consistent temperature throughout the year. They gather really close because they get their warmth from each other, right? So they're just a little feller, so it's hard to retain your body heat. And then they usually lose about 10 to 30 days of their fat reserves over the winter. So they'll, not over the winter, the 10 to 30% of their fat reserves if we wake them up before, in the middle of the day or something like that. That's why people are encouraged not to go into bat caves and poke them. Every time they wake up and they're not allowed to rebuild their body and metabolize, then we take away a lot of their fat reserves. So we want to be really conscious of that. Bat picking up, yes. Do we have rabies? Yes. Can bats carry rabies? Sure. Do all of them carry rabies? Heck no. So bats, again, we're looking at all of this. Everything's a gray area. So a bat far outweighs with what it can offer as a benefit us in our lives or themselves in their lives than they negate it with the rabies issue. Sound fair enough, Suga?
I know that if you want to work with bats in zoos, you have to get your rabies shots ahead of time.
Dang Skippy. Yeah. Touching
And,
bats.
Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, they have a fruit ad that they do an A to B, so it'll fly from a person to a perch or back and forth between two people. So it's really cool, but not a lot of people get to do it because shots, but it's really cool.
Yeah, it really amazing. Yeah, I mean, we have to protect our people, right, all the time, because flukes happen, and I'm usually the recipient of every fluke on the planet. But I did some bat research in southern Pennsylvania, same thing, had to receive our rabies shot in a bat cave. The other virus that rolls around in a lot of bat guano is Hanta. It's not going to roll around your property. It's where thousands of bats spent thousands of hours laying many, many inches of poop down. So, so anyway, quite fascinating. Big fan of the bat in this world. So bobcats. Moving on to our carnivores. So anybody see a bobcat in the wild? You did? Where'd you see him? Trillium Lake. Cool. And where'd you see your bobcat?
I actually had a friend who found one on their property and so they had captured it to move back to where it should be.
Oh. They didn't make it a pet or anything, right? Like,
I don't think so.
I don't know why Fluffy's eating the other cats. So yeah, bobcats are our mid-sized cat, or our smallest wild cat. You can see they've got kind of, I call it a half a tail, so I'm going to show you a lynx in comparison. Bobcats are about probably no more than 30 pounds tops. They're long-legged. They've got a half a tail with a very dark end on it. They do have ear tufts, and it's really hard to see the ear tufts on this guy, but at the tips of each of those ears are a little ear tuft. And then they have this thing called a ruff here, which is more pretty pronounced but not outrageous. It's a really fantastic cat to have around. Again, a great rodent killer. Think about all of our large carnivores as guys that would much rather eat a whole lot of little things, are our selected fellas, than one big K-selected beastie. There is a lynx, people. So, wow, what a difference. Now, I'm going to give you a little side bit. That is a Canada lynx, so it's a slightly different looking, but I can't find a darn local lynx to save my skin. Giant ear tufts, giant ruff, about a quarter of a tail, and they're about 45 pounds. So we got that little meow and that little meow. Now, I will tell you, I live on right outside of Sandy, 2 miles outside of Sandy. 2 months ago, coming home from work, probably 10 o'clock at night, come around a corner to my farm, lynx.
Sounds familiar.
Fantastic. The next day, Amazon, game cam, very excited. So, in that order. So, lynx and bobcat, cougars, all of these larger predators tend to use something called corridors. The corridors that they tend to use in our area may be road corridors, the corridors that they've created. By the way, our roads we put in over wildlife corridors, so most of the roads that we have around here were originally deer trails. These guys really love to go up riparian corridors, so along creeks and rivers. So those are usually pretty big uninterrupted spans of good cover. I live on a riparian corridor, so it's well utilized. Here's our biggest kitty, right? Cougar. Oh my goodness, does this rise any for people? I know we're having a lot of cougar sightings nowadays. So any thoughts as to why? Why so many cougars? What's that? Yeah, we're building some stuff in their habitat for sure. Yeah.
Recent wildfires kind of pushed them out a little bit too.
That can definitely shove species around a bit. Wildfires can shove species around because, again, if you're a big guy that eats a lot of little guys for a living and those little guys get wiped out, it's going to be a little time before they start to come back again. So we have a lot of wildfire displaced animals. Our herbivores are some of the biggest wildfire displaced animals. So cougar, we're seeing a lot of sightings. There's another thing is that cougars and large predators are, one, maybe getting desensitized to human beings being around, much like our coyotes and our raccoons, right? They're desensitized more to people. They also realize that in populated areas, there are resources to eat there too.
Yes.
Meow. Cats, dogs, small livestock, goats, sheep. If a horse is laying down taking a flat out nap, that might be a selection for it. I will tell you, I lived in Estacada and I had a female cougar who had a den for 6 years on the creek that I lived on. And she would pass through. I had a 48-year-old blind mule there who was never bothered by her. So passing through a standing large animal is a poor risk. I'll tell you why it's a poor risk for a cougar, because a cougar is a solitary hunter. And a solitary hunter's got to be pretty aware about what it's going to be, if what it wants to eat is going to cause any damage to it, right? So if that cougar can have its head kicked in by a horse, it's going to say, maybe I'll eat 25 voles instead of that horse. So they will, by nature, select things that are smaller and easier to pick on than large things. Or if they can use, the other thing that cats do is they surprise them, right? So they use the element of surprise. If they can pounce, a cougar kills a quick and easy kill. I always say, well, if I want to go, and my husband knows this and it makes him crazy, if I'm going to go, let it not be a pack of wild dogs or coyotes. Let it be a cougar. That'll be fast. He just hates that. But cougars tend to drop from the top onto their prey, and they quickly either break their neck or suffocate them, and it's done. It's a quick deal, one and done. Coyotes, wolves, they tend to come hunt in packs, and they come from below, and that's kind of an awful death. They'll eviscerate, they'll break a leg, they'll, you know, it ain't pretty. So yes, cougar, thank you. So let's move on to these guys. It's so funny, I used to say, well, forget the wolf, I'm just using it as comparison, there are none in the area. Well, we now have wolves in the area. So yes, let's look at both of these fellas now. So coyotes, they're pretty endemic, right? They've also gotten super used to being around people. Do you know that there are 3 separate packs of coyotes that live in North Portland alone? 3 well-established, fabulous packs of coyotes that live in this city. In Gresham, we've got at least 3 packs of coyotes that have been there for 50 to 60 years. Nobody sees them, but once you see them everywhere, which is nuts. So our eyes as human beings, we're trained to look at patterns. So if something's out of our general tick list of things that we see regularly, have you ever done that? You've been like, well, someone this morning said, well, it's not a this, it's not a that. Oh my God, it's the other thing. So oftentimes we're just trained to not see these things. They can be endemic and everywhere, but the minute we do see it, then we're like, oh my gosh, they're everywhere. It's amazing. So coyotes are pack dwellers, as are wolves. They hunt in communion with each other. They are very strong family units. They're amazing creatures. These guys, coyotes, generally around 35 pounds, or 25 pounds, and they look way bigger because they've got big, long legs. So they may look huge, but you get it wet, and it's just a skinny guy with long legs. These guys have a whole series of complex communications, from howling to yipping to yapping, and there's a whole lot of talking that goes on when they're hunting or finding each other or locating another pack. I've got 3 packs around me. So when they're in the vicinity of each other, there's a whole lot of conversation going back. We're over here, I'm over here, sounds good, that's perfect. And oftentimes there's immigration or emigration into a pack, which is really fantastic. Wolves I know a little bit less about, but obviously a wolf is quite substantially bigger. They tend to have sometimes in areas where the resources are more slender, smaller packs. In our area, when we start, you know, now that we're reintroducing wolves and they're starting to get, they're highly migratory, so they'll put a lot of miles on. We may have lone males looking for a pack, lone females looking for a pack, so there's a whole lot of kind of, the lone wolf thing cracks me up, but yeah, lone wolves running around. So these guys have rounded tips, coyotes got sharper tips. Coyotes tend to be redder, wolves can be any color. Yeah.
I have a question going back with the cougars
Yeah.
and mountain lions.
Yeah.
Do you use that word interchangeably?
Yeah. Cougar, puma, mountain lion.
Okay.
Yeah, same fella, for sure. All very different vernacular. I was thinking about the marmot, hoary marmot that we have here in this, you know, higher regions in eastern area. Back in Rhode Island, they call them whistle pigs, and you know there are a million names for a million of these guys, but same thing. So is this guy a super genius? Heck yeah, he is. So here in this area, as a farm person, we have a lot of this. I'm killing coyotes, and I go, oh, that's never going to work, and it's going to make the problem worse. And I have not been able to sell my pitch on anyone who is trapping and killing coyotes yet. We are determined to do something if someone that we love or something that we love gets hurt or killed, and we get, again, completely focused on that. Here's why killing or poisoning coyotes doesn't work. A stable pack over here, you have your alphas, they have puppies, you have your betas, they don't breed. You knock off one or the other, the alpha, cuts numbers by half, but only for a sec, then everybody breeds. So they have an amazing way of keeping their populations stable. This is why it doesn't work, people. This I'll go on for days. I've brought this to folks, and it doesn't matter. They say, I'm just going to kill them all. Well, no, you won't. And so we've seen coyote, since there have been more urban coyotes and more coyotes in farm areas, we've seen the populations explode because we have way more trapping and killing and shooting.
My understanding too is that the wolves and the cougars help keep the coyote populations in check. So if you reintroduce the higher up predator, it keeps their population better.
Darn Skippy. So, just because they're dogs doesn't make them part of a private club. So you're right, coyotes are prey items to larger predators as well. So when we put these apex predators back in, like wolves, cougars, it shifts the whole combination of everybody that's out there. So, so share that, spread the word, talk about it. Quickly, we have some non-native invasive species. We've got our nutria, feral pigs more on the east side, and eastern gray squirrels. Here's the nutria. Yes.
Before you get off of wolves and coyotes,
Yes, sir.
I had the privilege of seeing a pack of red foxes.
Ooh,
Beautiful red foxes, just once.
fabulous.
Night, so they're around here too.
Yes, we have red fox around here, gray fox over the divide, and just amazing critters.
Beautiful.
Weirdly enough, not native.
Yeah, but they're here.
So gray fox, we had gray fox. Gray fox is kind of a really talented tree climber. So when we tally-hoed ourselves into the States here, we took our sport of fox hunting. The Europeans took their sport of fox hunting, and how unfortunate that we cannot tally-ho ourselves up a tree. So they started importing red foxes. Now they're endemic. Same thing with our ringneck pheasants, so that we can continue to sport.
Hard to see. I've never seen them.
Yeah, they're pretty shy. So this nutria, I'm going to show you the nutria. It looks like an old Scottish guy. Who was talking about nutria earlier? Was it you guys? Yeah, so this is a nutria. It's probably, I'd say, I can't give you a poundage on it because they can really vary in their sizes depending on the resources. They are rodents. They were shipped in from South America because we all have fads. Let's see, what's our latest fad? It was the baggy pants. I'm glad that's kind of gone. Back in the 20s, one of our fads was the big beaver skin coats. And so we basically annihilated every beaver in sight. So they started shipping in nutrias and having nutria farms to make these beaver skin coats out of. As with any fashion fad, that went away. They opened the gates. Nutria ran. They inhabited a good chunk of the same niche as the beaver. They overtook the joint because they can out-adapt. Now we have a lot of nutria here. A lot of nutria. Anybody see you have nutrias in your neighborhood?
I saw them hiking up in the Bill Rocks. Well, I wonder what it was, because there was a valley and a glacier, and these critters were coming up from under the glacier water.
And it was nutria?
I don't know what it was. It wasn't a beaver.
Yeah, I don't know. That's really, in the Goat Rocks?
Yeah.
Oh, we'll have to talk about that because that might be someone else very exciting.
Okay.
So we'll chat about that. So nutria looks a little bit like a beaver with a kind of a blunter face, and then they have a ridged tail, or a round tail, pardon me. Here's our beaver for comparison. Handsome devil, flat tail. An adult is larger considerably by that, but remember that we're not always dealing with adults. And then we have our muskrat, which is smaller, and their tail is a ridged tail. So if you're looking at someone swimming in the water, what the heck are you? Look for that round tail, look for that flat tail, and they can slap as a warning, and look for the ridge on a tail, and you can tell who's who. So we went through mammals. I teach a lot of mammals class. There's a ton of mammals in there. Sorry, it's just a little bit of get to know these guys. And now we're going to talk just briefly about birds. So birds a little bit different. I'm a big bird nerd. What makes a bird a bird? Well, we already went over what makes a mammal a mammal. Birds are also warm-blooded animals. They have feathers instead of fur. Can anyone tell us the first flying bird? We've all learned it in school.
Archaeopteryx.
Yeah, that's it. So when they started, when fur started becoming feathers, Archaeopteryx, way back when I was a kid, maybe Bill, was the first. They found its preserved remains and found feathers on that. Archaeopteryx, weirdly enough, was also like that flying squirrel. He didn't really fly, he just glided. They're egg laying and they have hollow bones. So hollow bones is an adaptation that they developed to help them get lighter, right? So if you're gonna be a flyer, you best not have a bunch of solid bones going on. So birds have hollow bones. They're woodpeckers and birds are really fascinating that they, instead of having a bunch of fissures holding their head bones together, they have a solid skull and a very long tongue that wraps around that and kind of keeps things together when they pound away at things. So they've got some terrific adaptations, including their beak adaptations. So beaks also help them stay lighter. Instead of having a big old jaw with a bunch of teeth in it, and then I have to make a hollow jaw, which isn't very strong, I'm gonna go ahead and make some beaks. So we have all sorts of beak adaptation. I won't tell you all about these. You can read it right here. But if there's a bird, there's a different beak. Some of these birds have, if you think about some of the birds over in the Galapagos Islands, even the finches that live on certain islands, their beaks, yeah, Darwin's finches. So you have finches that live on an island, and there is a certain species of plant there, and their beak is uniquely adapted to eat that plant or drink that nectar or what have you. The honey creepers in Hawaii, some of them are adapted just to eat out of one type of flower. So quite amazing stuff. They also have some really interesting feats. So we have ansiodactylid feet. So some of our raptors have that. Really good grippers with one hind-facing toe. Zygodactyl is 2 forward and 2 back. So if you might be a guy that hangs out on the trunk of a tree, AKA what kind of bird? Pounding on the tree. Woodpecker, yeah. So those guys will be zygodactyl so they can hang onto a tree. Heterodactyl, standing toes with some waders in the back. Syndactyl, that rear toe is way the heck back there. And pamperodactyl, all of your toes facing forward. Can you imagine if our woodpecker had that going on? He would never stick to a tree. So lots of great adaptations according to what niche they fill. So check this out, people. Lucky us, we live in the Portland metro area because we are way important on the Pacific Flyway. Just in case you wanted a graphic on that, you can see how amazing this place is for birds. So has anybody been to some of our bird hotspots like Malheur? We've all heard of Malheur at this point, but Malheur, the Klamath Lakes region, huge Pacific Flyway stopovers, but not only are we rocking the north and south route for birds as a pass-through, but we're rocking the east-west route too. So birds will tend to follow river systems. So we have a north-south river here, and we're at the confluence of that. Which one is that one? Goes from the south, flows from the north. Yeah, the Willamette, exactly. And then we have the Columbia, which goes east to west. So just because we had the collision of these two rivers alone, we have a huge concentration of migratory birds. So big, fat, feathery deal. So I want us to look at this little fella here. Does anybody know what bird this one is? Before I do that, I'm going to tell you how many birds we have in our region. We have 400 different species of birds that are residents in this region. So it pays to know how to make them happy. Although the majority of our birds are migratory, as is this little fella here, they may travel thousands of miles to get to here or through here. So we have birds that will migrate from the Arctic to Mexico. We have birds that migrate from South America, that guy to here to nest. So we have a lot going on bird-wise. We have 54 species in this particular area that are now considered threatened or endangered according to the Audubon Society. So we're also at some peril here for our birds. So now I'll talk about this young fella. His name is McGillivray's warbler, and he is a South American warbler. And he comes up here and he nests on the ground. So ground nesting is all good and groovy, and we've got plenty of ground nesting birds here. And we think, well, why are you doing that? You know, the predators can get to you on the ground. Well, I have some birds that are ground nesters on my property, and they are so well hidden that it's just shocking to me. It took me seeing an adult going in and out multiple times to see that there was an actual ground nest there. But this guy's a neotropical migrant, and neotropical means I'm going from the tropics back up here and back to the tropics. So nests in North America, winters down in the sunnier climes. So he's a serious snowbird, this guy. They're a prairie nester, so this guy nests out on the prairie in the grasslands, and his nest predation is his biggest issue. So nest predation by local wildlife is a big deal, and what's even a bigger deal with this McGillivray's warbler is nest predation by what? Cats. Dang it.
Yeah.
I'm a crazy cat lady, and yes, cats. Cats are responsible for a huge amount of the decline in our neotropical migrants and local birds in this area. I am owned by 2 cats. I can vouch for this. So having protected habitat set aside for little guys like this and other threatened animals is becoming increasingly more important. When we try to set aside property for these guys or areas for these guys to protect them, oftentimes it's the human animals that go into an uproar. Well, I pay taxes and they don't, and I've heard it all. So when we're looking at preserving a species, that can be a real hot button deal. So what can we do at home for that? Well, we can build those fancy things. Anybody hear of this before? A catio? Yeah. Catios, yeah, catio. I used to work with a program called the Backyard Habitat Program, and we certified people's habitats in their yards. And I had more fun going to these places. There was a catio tour that we went on. I have farm cats, so they're pretty darn good at hunting, the rhodentia. But there are some pretty snazzy catios out there. I was pretty impressed. But cats they are responsible for a lot of destruction. So thank you to the catio people. By the way, last year in the United States alone, 2.4 billion birds were killed by our pet cats. So, yoinks. Enough of that killing stuff. Let's talk about how we can live with wildlife and make it great and put it in our own yard. So, this is a guy named Tim Miller's yard. Tim Miller lives on the corner of like 39th and Holgate in Portland, and he's kind of my hero. So he started his own, he has a love for the Camas prairies in Washington, one of the Nature Conservancy properties. So he's like, I really love the Camas, and I love when Camas blooms here, and what can I do to make my yard a beautiful place for me and a productive place for wildlife? And how can I grow things that grow here really well so I can save a bundle on watering, not sweat about pests, and know that these things can be desiccated in the summer and drenched in the winter? Well, he put himself a native habitat in here. So all of these beautiful plants in here, from the ceanothus against his house to the monkey flower to the camas in here, it's all native to the Willamette Valley region. So Tim nailed it. And he's got a lot of critters to vouch for it too. So it's pretty incredible. But you don't need to go all Tim Miller on the place if you like your lawn. You can do a lot or you can do a little. So Tim Miller is kind of the rock star, but we can do other things too. Let me back up here. So even just planting 5% of our yard in native trees, shrubs, and forbs can help increase our native wildlife there as well. So it's pretty cool stuff. Here's an interesting side note on invasive species too. So if we're talking about birds, mammal invasive species, let's not stop at birds because they really get crack-a-lackin'. So invasive species, we have about 200 million European starlings in North America. And in
Oh, you're doing it.
Oh God, yes. 60 of those things were brought over by some fella.
Rich guy who loves Shakespeare.
That's right, some rich guy who dug Shakespeare. So tell this story.
So he tried it a few times actually, but this rich gentleman really loves Shakespeare, and Shakespeare loves starlings. So they brought the European starling to Central Park, and I forget how many he released, 60. I think he tried it 3 times, and now they're all the way over here, and they're just one of the worst invasive species. They're pretty bad.
Yeah, he also brought this little dude over too, this European house sparrow. So I think what I had heard was, so this guy's name is Eugene Schieffelin. He was a New York pharmaceutical manufacturer in 1890. He started this whole party. Shakespeare has a bunch of sonnets. In his sonnets, he extols these wonderful European birds. Eugene Schieffelin thought, this is going to be the greatest thing on the planet. I'm going to take some of my extra cash and ship a bunch of these crazies over here and put them in Central Park. And then he's like, oh, I forgot, they have wings. And so they just started going. And so these guys took hold, 200 million now. Probably more European house sparrows we see around here than our local sparrows on the East Coast. I've been involved with projects trying to eradicate these things. Mute swans. So if you've ever been beaten by a mute swan trying to protect its nest and eggs, it's not a pleasant situation.
Speaking of eradicating invasive species, the Institute for Applied Ecology holds an invasive species cook-off every year.
Yes!
In the Corvallis area where you can actually go and you can eat these invasive species.
Yes!
I have actually eaten European starling.
Was it delicious and tiny?
It wasn't bad, actually.
So I've gone down there too, and I've eaten knotweed salads and all kinds of invasive plants. And being that I'm an herbivore, so you know, although the critters look delicious too, and I've had nutria, and that was lovely. Just as a note about this little starling here, they're so darn cute. And I remember as a kid, I read a book called Arnie the Darling Starling, and it just killed me for everything because it was about a woman who took in a starling as a pet, and he could talk and. But these guys are real bullies. They're cavity nesters, so they nest in cavities. They bully every other cavity nester around. So we have woodpeckers that are bullied, any of these other little guys that live in holes or nest boxes. Any of our birdhouse network birds back there bullied and shoved out for this starling. So we're really seeing a reduction in a lot of our cavity nesters because of these fellas right here. There's also an interesting thing, a fungus called, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, I've been practicing, Histoplasma capsulatum can grow in the soil beneath roosting starlings. The fungal spores become airborne if the soil is disturbed and cause a disease called histoplasmosis, which is interesting, which in rare cases can cause blindness and death. Once again, not a lot of it, not much, don't freak out, it's just a thing that is not fun. So anyway, our invasive species can be a problem. So when we build stuff for our natives, understand that the natives might take over as well. So we got a lot of waterfowl. Whoops, I totally missed my waterfowl. There are no waterfowl here, people. We have a lot of ducks in the area too. We have diving ducks, we have dabbling ducks. A lot of our native ducks we have native ducks that are cavity nesters as well, and those would be our wood ducks. So it's important to leave snags up on our property. If you have a larger property like this, we'll walk by and we'll see some of these snags. And the wood ducks use nest holes left by sometimes starlings, oftentimes owls and other cavity nesters. Birds of prey, talk about those. So we have 3 different types of birds of prey. So oftentimes when we're looking at a hawk, we're looking at that, right? We're not really seeing a guy standing on a fence post. So here's your guide to birds of prey, which is fun. We have accipiters. Accipiters are these really nimble forest hunters. So they've got short wings and really long tails. So they're pretty maneuverable, like a fighter jet. You'll find a lot of those guys in the forest, like the Cooper's hawks. They can maneuver through trees without crashing into things. We have buteos, and those are our really high flyers that might hunt more in the grasslands. So what's a big high flyer we got around here? Vultures. What's that?
Vultures.
Vultures. We've got vultures for sure. How about those red-tailed fellas? Yeah, hawks, you got it. So red-tailed hawks are one of our biggest beauties. I have a whole nest of red-tailed hawk. I have 2 babies and an adult, and they're now at the screaming stage at each other on my farm. So it's like, I need some lunch, I'm going. But these guys are great at catching air drafts. They've got a lot of wing surface, so they can catch drafts. They can look down and see what's going on down there. And then we have our falcons, and our falcons are things like our peregrines, those cliff hunters. And the peregrine falcon is the highest, that animal achieves the highest speed of any creature on the earth. When it's at a full dive, I think I had read somewhere, what is it, 85 miles an hour? Something at a full dive, faster than 85. They're screamers. So if you want to see some gray peregrine falcons, we have a nesting pair under the St. John's Bridge, and we also have another pair under the Markham Bridge. So there's our red-tailed dude. Look at that big wing. There's our Cupers, a little bit more sleek looking. And then there's my favorite. Oh, I love that. This guy, so this is my spirit bird. God help me. So we've got carrion-eating bird. Oh my God, things that eat dead things. Now you know why I'm named Roadkill, because I love this. So carrion eaters, our biggest carrion eater we have, or our most prolific one is the vulture. So we have this vulture here. There are black vultures in other regions. We have, what's the big bird that we're reintroducing now? Turkey vulture. That's our fabulous little guy. And then we've got a great big guy that we're reintroducing in the area. California condor, right? Biggest carrion eater. And we actually have it, and again, super secret, right across the river on Clear Creek. We actually have a Metro has got a project and a breeding program going right there.
I got something you'll appreciate.
Love it.
The dean of my college that I went to, if you will, dean, she was the head veterinarian on the California Condor Recovery Project for like 10, 15 years. She had a
Wow.
really good story of a condor grabbing her earlobe once, and so she still has the earlobe.
Is the earlobe still there, right?
Yeah, she did that for like 10, 15 years through like LA Zoo, Santa Barbara Zoo.
That's fantastic. That is, so this is really, so that's an interesting side note too, is that when we have animals that start to get, we have these levels of, danger, Will Robinson. We have species of, we have prolific guys, then we have species of special concerns, like, hey, we need to pay attention. This species is in decline. Then we have threatened species. Then we get endangered species. So those were like, we're almost out. And by the time our animals hit that endangered species level, our genetic diversity has gone into the, what. There's a lot of conversation in the wildlife world about whether it's worth it financially and biologically to start to try to recapture or regrow populations that have reached the endangered level. So some of the concerns with the condors were that they were so chronically endangered that the genetic diversity was non-existent. We're seeing great, and genetics will start to expand over time, but you're all coming out of just a few birds. Same thing with the cheetahs. They says a comment about the cheetahs. They were so threatened that when they started rebreeding them, you could take a skin graft off of a cheetah and throw it on another cheetah and it would grow because there's not that much genetic diversity. So I think that that's not been a problem with the condors, but I'm not that deep into that.
No, I also know that, and you probably appreciate this, World Wildlife Fund, the runner-up instead of the panda was going to be the California condor, which most people probably like the panda, but you and I probably would prefer the California condor.
Cute schmoot. I know everybody wants the cute thing. Look at that face. Yeah. Look at that. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of a guy that eats a dead thing, or my name isn't Roadkill Cloutier. So any condors, these turkey vultures, black vultures, they all serve a really important part of our ecosystem. They're detritivores. They are our carrion eaters. They're the guys that are eating the dead stuff on the ground. I say if we didn't have these guys, or if we didn't have I call it FBI, fungus, bacteria, and insects that consume dead things, we'd have dead things to the stars, right? So thank God for these guys that fly around and go, excellent, what's that? So a little bit about their biology that's fascinating to me is that adorable little red head with wrinkles on it. There is bald. People think, biologists think that it's that way because they spend a lot of time with their head in dead things. You don't want to have your feathers sticking together. You don't want to have bacteria that'll encourage disease. So they've just, evolutionarily, they've got no feathers on their head. They've got an incredible sense of smell, obviously. They're high soarers. They do a lot of time soaring on these updrafts. So you may find whole batches of these guys riding updrafts all day, barely flapping a wing. They also have high acidity in their urea, so in their waste, so they'll poop on their own feet. because it acts as a antibacterial for their feet as well. So they're actually incredibly clean guys, for whatever it's worth. So these guys, the problem with these guys and their declines that have been challenged, what are we doing because we want to eradicate some of those coyotes in the area? Poison, you got it, yeah, arsenic. Nasty things we're throwing in carcasses and then we're leaving it out and we're like, oh, hopefully the coyotes will come and eat that and it'll knock the coyotes off. But there's something called bycatch in the world. And bycatch is that you're not just getting the one guy that you think you're getting. So the vultures show up and they feed from that carcass too and they die. Something comes and feeds from the carcass of the vulture and they die. So when we think about trying to target some species that we find distasteful, we're really taking them all out. So it's quite a shame, but
And the federal government just okayed using arsenic again.
outstanding.
Cyanide bombs.
Cyanide bombs, yeah. So it's just, yeah. And we've been using, what we've been using in some, what folks have placed in the carcasses was arsenic. Then they traded arsenic because it's so ground contaminating with warfarin, which is the rat poison, a blood thinner. Yeah,
Just a quick tangent, just 'cause
Sure.
it's relevant to this. So
go for it.
You've seen Vulture Apocalypse?
No.
Okay, so in India, folks don't eat the cows there, so they leave the cows' dead bodies out. And this medicine, they didn't figure it out till recently. It killed like 90% of the vulture population. So when the vulture population went down, the rabies counts in humans and the attacks from leopards and the fatalities from leopards goes up because the vultures are gone. So now the dogs are breeding more rampantly, and what eats the dogs? The leopards. So people are getting attacked more by leopards.
Wow.
And people are getting more rabies from being bit by dogs because the vultures aren't there. So that's why, that's something that we can see happening in the old world that we don't want to have happen here.
Right, that's
why they're the best.
it's so challenging to think linear. We're very linear thinkers and we're like, well, what could possibly go wrong? I'm gonna introduce this thing. And then we're going to take this thing out that annoys me, and the whole we're a food web, we collapse. Yeah.
It's the, I went to see like a raptor show and they're talking about how, and people like do poison for mice or rats, they, and then they leave them out in fields, that kills off owl and, like falcon populations, which then increases the rat populations.
Right.
Making the issue worse and killing off a major predator.
Right. We inadvertently screw a lot up. We were using DDT right up until 1974, was it? And that caused what? Do you remember what that caused? Yes, eggshell thinning, right? So DDT gets in our water. It gets what lives in the water? The aquatic macroinvertebrates, aquatic bugs. What eats the bug? The fish. The fish bioaccumulates the DDT. What eats the fish? The bird. Boom, soft eggshells. Now we have a endangered bald eagle. So it's like, who would have thunk it, right? So yeah.
So, two things. The collective noun for vultures is a venue.
A what?
A venue.
A vineo.
A venue. So the collective noun, when you see all those vultures swimming around together, it's a venue.
Yeah.
But my question with that is, what are their social dynamics? Because there will be so many of them that come together.
Yes.
I live just right over the Clackamas, and it's like sometimes there are just dozens of them soaring together. So are those all old family units? Are they extended? Do we even know what their behavior is within their family structures?
I know someone has studied the daylights out of them. It wasn't me. So I would love to know that too. I know that they do come together. I know that there are communal roost trees. I know that they will communally eat a carcass because there's way more carcass generally than one vulture can dine on at one shot. So why not share? But that's something I've wanted to dive in deeper to because they're just such amazing animals. They don't overwinter here, so in fall they blast off and head down to Northern California and south. So I'm always sad to see my last vulture go. Always glad to see my first vulture show up. So very important to have guys that eat guys. So let's talk about pollinators. Oh my God, we're moving to bugs. So yes, even those flying you-know-whats are pollinators. So I'll just let you know that. After last year, I think I'd never been stung in my life by a bee, and I've worked around bees and wasps my whole life. I was stung 8 times last year. So we have to accept that all pollinators, maybe, even if these guys are a little jerky, like say, I don't know, that guy here, or maybe that guy up there. But they're all really important in our ecosystem. So instead of, I always say there's where we get to slow our roll. There's still pollinators, and these predatory bees and wasps will also eat pests, garden pests, because they become carnivorous at a certain point.
Real
So,
quick on that, is
yeah.
it possible to change the vernacular of bees and hornets? When you say bees, it puts everything in, but you're not being stung by bees.
Nope.
You're being stung by hornets.
Yeah.
But the bees get the bad rap that, oh my God, there's
Ah.
bees, save the bees, but kill the bees because they're stinging me. It's not the bees, it's
Right.
the hornets.
It's the hornets and wasps, right? Exactly. And there are 3 species of these fellers. I know, it's a tough one, isn't it? And then everybody gets lumped. Yeah.
So up at Central Oregon, there's a cabin, and there's like bees this big, and you can see the stinger, and I just never seen them before.
Oh, that's so cool. So the stinger, does it stick straight out? Does it stick up a little bit?
Sticks, I don't know, I haven't seen it, but someone said they got stung and they pulled it out, and it was like this big.
Oh my goodness.
There's a parasitic wasp.
That's right.
That-
There's a,
That don't sting him, is that's what they're putting into the wood to put into larvae spores.
that's right. So these, I'm bummed to hear that one would sting a person. Usually that's actually an ovipositor. So those big monster, but you're like, oh my God, what are you? You're terrifying. That big long thing is an ovipositor, and they will make these, here's something crazy for you. They'll lay their eggs in aphids and other insects, and they'll make what they call zombie bugs. So the eggs hatch in there, and then the babies eat the aphid and the other thing from the inside out. So they're incredible biocontrols for your garden. So next time you see one of those, give it a kiss for me. Maybe not. Maybe just shake its hand, say hello, say hi to its mom for me. Okay, so pollinators are incredibly important to our ecosystem. I think we just said 30% of all, I gotta get my numbers right because this is super important. Well, I'll talk about that in just a second. So this right here, this is a big, 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 big deal. Can I say one more big? This is a big deal. So neonicotinoids. I know neonicotinoids became kind of a little bit more of a household name a few years ago. Can anybody tell me what the deal is with those?
Kills all the bees.
Yeah, it kills the bees. So what happened 3 years ago? What is the McMinnville
Yeah.
Home Depot parking lot? Suddenly there are hundreds of thousands of bees dropping from the sky dead. Mass swarm collapse there. It was a big deal, and people freaked out. What just happened? And through backtracking and doing research and testing these deceased bees, they found out that they had just fed on the pollen from, I think it was filbert orchard. No, it wasn't. It was a different plant that was, something else that was grown from seeds treated with this neonicotinoid. So doesn't that look dreamy? This plant's protected from problematic aphids, whiteflies, beetles, and mealybugs, and other unwanted pests by neonicotinoids. Yay! It's the best thing ever. So they coat the seeds of these plants with this neonic. It's purple or green. The plant grows up to be pest resistant. So it's actually got a pesticide built into the plant. So as the plant grows up, something comes along to pollinate it, to eat the nectar and collect the pollen off of it, and it dies. So every piece of that plant is now coated in a pesticide, meaning that it is resulting in the death of our pollinators. This is a bad deal. This is a good, what could possibly go wrong idea gone wrong vastly. So in my opinion, so this was a big deal. Now it used to be like, yay, neonics, let's put that on everything. Oh, my garden looks great. Now I encourage everybody to go to your garden center and ask, is this plant neonic free? Because that's a big deal. They're still using neonicotinoids, and we're trying to get that outlawed. But, well, things happen and things get unoutlawed. I just really want to encourage everybody to look at that. Now we're looking for plant tags that say this is a neonicotinoid-free plant. Some of our plants are coming from out of the state, so you can't watch everything. So anyway, neonics are a big, hairy deal. So are most pesticides, really. So we think that pollinators might be just the bumblebees and stuff, but we have a lot of things that pollinate, just to keep in mind. So we have, here's your little guy with his ovipositor. So we have Wasps, we've got, well, sunbirds, we don't have those here, but we've got birds, bats, moths and butterflies, bees, wasps. We even can be pollinated by a mammal, you know. Mammals walk through a pollen-ridden flower field and they're going to drop as well and pollinate. So pollination happens in a whole lot of different ways. So we need to look at pollinators in a really global view instead of just in that narrow, like, I see bumblebees, they're pollinating.
We've become aware that bumblebees are threatened, and so we planted we found out that California poppies really attract bumblebees, and so we've been planting California poppies, and since they are native basically, even though they're from California, they still grow here well. I encourage everybody to plant as many poppies as you can because they really love poppies.
Yeah, and I will even up that game. Here you go, Bill Lennon. I'm going to up you one. I'm going to up the game, and I'm going to say plant things that are native to here, and you will have more of our native bees and pollinators pollinating. So things that are native to here, we have some poppies as well. So any kind of flowering habitat, prairie grass habitat, prairie flowers habitat, those are all great for pollinators. Our ceanothus, our native ceanothus, is really popular to pollinators. Red flowering currants, huge pollinator plants, and they know how to live here too. And I will tell you, my California poppies know how to live here too. They're pretty happy. So want to talk a little bit about monarchs as well. Let me pop back to that fella. Whoops, that fella. So monarch butterflies, so here's another little, this is only my opinion, so forgive me and take it with a grain of salt. So monarchs, I want to make sure that I've got this right. Habitat loss is a huge cause of pollinator decline, and I'm going to give you some monarch butterfly stats because monarchs and milkweed have been a big fat hairy deal lately. So monarch butterflies, for example, use over 30 different species of milkweed to breed, of which only 19 varieties are sold by seed distributors. We have a native showy milkweed here in the Willamette Valley that our monarchs use. Monarch growth in the U.S. is affected by herbicide use on farms, big shock, right? Urban development and harsh weather conditions. So check this out. People talk about the monarch migration, right? So monarchs migrate down to California or Mexico, and then they come up here, and we all think about that migration just being one monarch just kicking rear and taking names, right? We're like, wow, you're amazing for a little guy. It takes 4 generations plus for monarchs to complete that migration. So where nature puts milkweed is in a certain area. We get very monarch supportive because we're wonderful humans, and we start planting milkweed in places that might be north of or east of or not in the area where milkweed naturally occurs, and suddenly we're dragging a generation of them up where they could die from the winter. So monarchs and milkweed co-evolved to complete this circuit in a certain area. So if we drag them to colder climes, more higher climes, then we may be actually not helping them, but hurting them. So my encouragement for folks with this whole milkweed dealio is to see if milkweed naturally occurs in your area, because we may be causing them to move into a unnatural habitat. So that being said, in 2004, monarch populations migrating to Mexico reached 550 million butterflies. In 2013, the number dropped to 33 million. So 2004, 550 million, 2013, 33 million. Not looking good. Again, habitat loss and pesticides are huge contributors to that. So just as a heads up. So we should care about our pollinators for a lot of reasons. One of them is that 1/3 of all of our agricultural crops in the world depend on pollinators. So 1/3 of all of our agricultural crops depend on pollinators to grow. So we can can 1/3 of all of our foods. And then once we do that, that edge collapses, and then you see that we start collapsing all over the place. So my recommendation for everyone is watch your pesticide use. I have pesticide fact sheets at the Clackamas River Basin Council website. We have a whole variety of pesticide use fact sheets. Use them wisely. Don't use them at all. Use them in the right time, the right place, the right amount, blah, 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 or just can them. Be organic, be a little weedy. And then when people come and go, look at the dandelions, and you go, we're pesticide free, yay! And then people forgive you the weeds. That's just how it goes, but we can be less orderly than that. So the other thing is we can create a bird-friendly yard, and that's with some of our pollinator plants and different resources. So how does it fit in the natural system? Animals use corridors, and we'll go look at those when we take our walk today. So natural and man-made corridors. 'Tis the roadkill season here. Sadly, leaving my road today, there were 2 opossums that had gone to the great hereafter on it. So when we build roads, animals are going to use those as their corridors too. It's just an easier place to travel until a car comes down on you. They use habitat resources or fulfill niches within those resources. We have a great amount of biodiversity. So when we have biodiversity in an area, it helps all of the species increase. And then we can talk about keystone species later too. And those are animals that change their environment so that they can live. So population challenges. We have declines in numbers due to habitat loss and competition from non-natives. So there's that encroachment piece, right? It's us on them. It's not them on us. It's a little different than we think. And some mammals have adjusted their lifestyle to coexist with us, but can we coexist with them? So getting a little bit more plastic in the way we look at our wildlife is good. So what can we do? We can feed wildlife responsibly, or we can feed wildlife not at all. So I have pulled all of my bird feeding aside. If I want to see some songbirds, I'll throw a little something out in the spring. But let them use the natural resources. If we're going to be lazy in the winter and not fill our hummingbird feeders, we do have hummingbirds that stay here all winter long, bless their hearts. So if they get used to a resource, meaning our hummingbird feeder, and then it gets too cold and rainy and we're like, oh, I don't want to go, then they're used to that resource and they're gonna die. So don't feed them, just let nature do it. Provide the habitat and expect them to be used, right? Provide sources of water. So everything from like little flat pans with some rocks in it so insects can drink, to bigger things. My water troughs at home, they all have pieces of 2x4 in them, because if a bug lands in there, they can crawl out on the 2x4 and fly away, because I'm a big sucker. Keep the cats indoors, or at least during the nesting season. Plant regional native. So by natives, I mean natives in our area to the Willamette Valley. So right behind you is a big old data log called the Portland Plant List. Can you hold that sucker up? So if we want to know what's native to the Willamette Valley, that big old honker there is on the Metro website, or you can look at that here. It's got all of our Willamette Valley natives. People are like, oh, it's native, but to Eastern Oregon, it's not native to here. So plant what knows how to live right here. And if you want to know, look out your window and go, I see what's native right here, right here. Reduce window strikes with birds, meaning put bird stickers on them. There's an invisible pen that you could use that birds can see. It's a UV pen. I've written on my windows. I came home with one, and my husband's like, what are you writing on the window? I'm like, don't hit this bird. I'm just writing things, So window strikes cause cats kill 2.2 million birds a year. Window strikes kill something like 50 million birds a year. It's insane. Yeah. So at certain parts of the day, that window looks suspiciously like a pass-through because it reflects the background back at it. That's how.
Did you use a pen that only the birds can see?
Yeah.
Where do you get
It's my secret magic marker pen. I got it from Backyard Bird Shop. It's just a UV bird pen.
That's what I figured.
Yeah.
I believe there's certain places in the desert, like when they do solar panel stuff, that the solar panels actually get hot enough that they like set the birds on fire.
Oh my God, that'd be terrible. Like spontaneous combustion. chicken meal.
Because the solar panel is blocking directly the desert.
Holy moly. They like turn into these ants and a little boy kid with a magnifying glass. That's terrible. Yeah, right, and we're trying to like get good with our solar, right? Let me be good and I'll use solar and roast a few birds. Reduce pesticide and fertilizer use. So those weed and feeds are really dangerous too. So I've spoken to people in the field that they're like, oh, I just use weed and feed. I'm like, that's not good either. And reduce monocultures and lawns. So it's crazy, this lawn thing we got, but is it crazy? Because our biology says, I really want to see across to that thing and make sure I'm safe. Now I'm comforted. So we have an affliction for lawns, and we like to play on them and goof off. But reduce these monocultures and lawns is a key thing. So I'm going to show you what's native, which is we're in the Willamette Valley right here, and that's what we want to use. Willamette Valley natives and wildlife. So here's, our wildlife has co-evolved to use the native plants that we have, co-evolved. So they evolved together over a gazillion years or something close to that. So here's a little for example for you. Our vine maple alone hosts 17 birds and 3 mammals. Serviceberry, native serviceberry, 21 birds, 5 mammals. Wood strawberry, 13 birds and 3 mammals. So if any of these natives, we've got these great layers that are specifically used by our native wildlife. Here's a fun thing, fun fact. If you go down and get those crazy boxwoods or whatever from the Home Desperate, you know, the little canned hedgerow hedge things, whatever cultivar plant that we have that wasn't grown, that doesn't grow here naturally, probably 3% of that entire plant is used by our native wildlife. 99.6% of our native plants on average are used by our native wildlife. 99.6. So, and these guys know how to live here. Like I said, they can be starving in the summer, they can flood in the winter, and they're going to be beautiful, and you don't have to use pesticides because they're pest resistant naturally, blah, blah, blah. All great stuff. Maintaining and improving habitat for these guys, there's the Backyard Wildlife Habitat Program. And then if you're outside of their service area, oh, by the way, if you do this Backyard Habitat Program, 35 smackers, and a consultant like me will come, well, like I used to be, will come to your yard, help you figure out what you like, what you want to do. And then they'll write up a planting plan for you. So you get some serious support doing that. If you're outside of the area like I am, National Wildlife Federation's Backyard Habitat Program gives you resources as well. They're not going to have a human come out, but you can get your sign and you can wave it proudly like I do. Plant the natives, expect them to be utilized. Plant a multi-story canopy because that's what nature does. Look out there. It's not just like grass and a tree. It's grass, forb, shrub, small tree, big tree. Provide the water, leave areas untouched. Oh my God, that's so hard for me. I'm such a garden freak. I want to touch everything. Oh, Bill, you and George are garden freaks too, so you get it. Leave areas untouched. They're going to look jungly. That's what animals like. And think about those habitat requirements again, right? Food, water, shelter, space, and arrangement. So something like this might be grand to me. I get all excited. There's vine maple and sorrel and all kinds of native stuff in there. Some people, again, check in with your guts. How are you feeling? Like, oh, I don't know what's around that corner. But that's a good native habitat with a lot of different layers. And then here's our layers that we look at in some of the critters, just the birds that utilize it. So we have all these layers, and here are just the birds that might utilize each layer. So know that some birds are going to hang out on the ground, and that's all they're going to get if it's protected, and some will be at the tops of the trees. We'll talk about stormwater management too. There's downspout disconnection and rain garden stuff. So to make more water for wildlife or to help our trees and plants grow well, we want to make sure that what's running off the roof and the driveway is going right back into the groundwater and not into the storm drain and not creating pollution. So you can take free classes on making rain gardens, which is really cool. I built 4 on my place. I totally dig them. They have made because I do have a lawny spot because I'm human, it has gone from a big soup pit in the middle of the winter to a delightful little grassy area because I'm taking up a bunch of that storm water. By the way, grass, the roots of our lawns go down this far. The roots of a multi-story canopy go down feet. So you have shallow roots, medium roots, deep roots, so tons of storm water is being taken up by our trees. As a matter of fact, one good mature tree, this guy out here, this big old maple here, will take up thousands of gallons of water a month, thousands of gallons. So people get all like freaked out. They're like, I just logged my property and now everything's flooding below me. And like, no one's drinking the water anymore. Plant the trees, increase tree canopy. You can go to Friends of Trees and get cheapo trees. They're natives. Yay. So lots of stuff. And then there's the pesticide piece of it. So you can, if you're in the Clackamas River Basin, you can join our pesticide-free or pesticide pledge program. So you can be wise about using pesticides, or you could just knock it off altogether. You get a really cool little metal sign with a salmon on it. If you're outside of the Clackamas River Basin, you can go to Metro and join their program as well. You can only be pesticide-free with them, though. They're hardcore. I love it. So if you're using stuff in your gardens and you don't know if it's going to kill the wildlife that you're trying to live with, you can go to this amazing app and site, Grow Smart, Grow Safe. It's Metro. You can get a free app if you've got an iPhone. If you're a jerk like me with the other kind of phone, Android, you don't get it. But you can go to this website here, and you can put in whatever you've got. So if you're like, well, Roundup, let's put that in, and then it tells you if it's a green, go, a yellow, ooh, and a red, don't use this. And then it'll give you alternatives if you need them too. So it's all automated for you. Yippee. Look, it's so easy to be smart. And then can't we all get along? So this is the human-wildlife interface. I spent quite a few years teaching aquatic-based eco-tours in New England on kayaks. And we had a ton of this, only someone would be sitting in a boat. These guys would be hauled out, trying to mind their business and digest and mend. And someone gets kicked back in the water because they freak out because no one pays attention to that boundary when they're like, oh, I'm a little nervous about you, and they keep coming. They lose all of their biological ability to carry out their mending processes or the digestion processes because they've now been taken out of their haul out. So we want to be aware of how we all get along and how we use our and interact with our world. Even with our problem guys, like this bear. So we have how we're interacting is also about being wise about what habitat they're utilizing, whether it's breeding season, or if we're being sensitive to their breeding seasons. I've gone up into the Jewel elk habitat area. Anybody go up there? The Jewel wildlife area is filled with elk, and I have just brilliantly played my cow call during breeding season, because what could possibly go wrong? I had teenage kids with me, and I had 4 bull elk on within 5 feet of me, and it was nerve-wracking, because I'm like, not an elk, not an elk. So be aware of all of these things that are living around us.